Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be talking about reading the ancient writings in our continuing study of the history of civilization. When we speak of writing in antiquity, and later on we're going to come back and look at the history of writing, so this isn't that, but we have things like hieroglyphs, we have cuneiform, we have what we're used to, alphabetic writing, and even the hieroglyphs and cuneiform eventually moved into that sort of alphabetic style of writing. But how do we read that? And in Egypt, one of the things that led to us being able to read the hieroglyphs was the discovery of the Rosetta Stone, found in a place called Rosetta. It was originally part of an obelisk. Now what you see on the right is a picture of the way it would have looked in the complete obelisk. They only found a portion of it. The rest was probably destroyed. And it was built into a wall. It was built into a wall in the city or town of Rosetta in northern Egypt, right on the Mediterranean, by some of the soldiers of Napoleon Bonaparte's army. Napoleon had invaded Egypt, and he was telling people he was liberating Egypt, but it was sort of a liberation/invasion, depending on what side you were on. And while they were there, they found this slab of rock. It was, I'm not sure what color it was when they found it. It eventually was black, and if you look at it today, it's mostly black. But that's mostly by the ink that was used to make a rubbing on it. And the Rosetta Stone, what's significant about it, it has three types of writing. Two languages that are represented, but three different types of writing. First of all, on the upper part, you see the hieroglyphs, and you can't make them out very well in this picture. You have to get pretty close to it. But these are what look like what people thought they were picture writing. They're really not, but they are pictures used to represent letters. But the hieroglyphs and under that is another type of Egyptian writing. Both two tops are both Egyptian, and this is known as Demotic. That is, just like we have the democratic concept of the people. It's the ordinary writing that people used. Hieroglyphs were thought of, and actually the word hieroglyph means sacred writings. They weren't used only for sacred sorts of things, but they had sort of that appeal. And it takes a bit longer to write in hieroglyphs, sort of like when you write in print writing and then you write in cursive writing. Of course, I'm so unused to cursive writing, I could probably write a lot faster in print writing. But that's the idea. It's sort of a shorthand writing where you can write it much faster. And then the bottom one was in Greek. Now, at the time this was discovered, Greek could be read, but not Demotic, not hieroglyph. They had forgotten, largely they'd forgotten how to speak or how to write in the Egyptian language. It was Champollion who is credited, there were other people involved, but he's the big name, who was credited with taking that Greek inscription and using it as a way to begin to crack. And it was a very, very slow process. This took years, but to begin to unravel and learn how to read the hieroglyphs. Now that worked for Egypt. If we go to the east, for example, to modern-day Iran, what they used to call Persia back until the 1920s, there's an inscription that does the same thing as the hieroglyphs. It's located near a town called Behistun. Like I said, modern-day Iran. We're at the plain level, looking up at a cliff, and now we're zooming in on that cliff to see a inscription made by Darius the Great, and he is explaining how he came to become king, because his father wasn't king. He was taking over from I guess you could call it another dynasty. He was like a third or fourth cousin. He was related to them, but now he's becoming king, and he's explaining how that happened. Is telling the story of his rise to power. Now the Behistun inscription, just like the Rosetta Stone, the Behistun inscription also had three types of writing, three languages in this case. The first was Old Persian, the second was Elamite, and the third was Akkadian. The Old Persian could be read, but not so much the Elamite, and especially the Akkadian, and this was going to help them unravel the cuneiform writing. And it was Sir Henry Rawlinson that did what Champollion had done for the for the Rosetta Stone, he did it for the Behistun inscription. He actually had to climb up there at times because the face of it is I don't know how many feet. It's way above the valley floor, and then there's a narrow ledge, and at times he would or he'd have an assistant. I hired a young kid who would climb this ladder, just teetering up against that cliff and copy and make rubbings of the inscriptions. Perhaps not quite so involved. I want to show you we go from very formalized writings like the Rosetta Stone, that's a stela, or the Behistun inscription, that's from the king. The Gezer calendar is normally thought to be a student's homework, where he's practicing his writing. Now this isn't hieroglyphs, this isn't cuneiform. In this case, it's very, very, very early Hebrew. You say, well, that doesn't look like Hebrew if you know the Hebrew alphabet, but this is the early way that they wrote those same letters. It is Hebrew, and it's sort of a little rhyme about the months of the year. The 3 months out of the year for planting, and 3 months for this, and 3 months for that. And it's probably a student's homework found in Gezer in Israel. Next, I want to talk about the Tel Amarna Tablets. Tel Amarna is in Egypt. The tablets were found by a peasant woman. She was working in the late 1800s. She was, looking for certain things to serve as fertilizer for her farm, and she came across these tablets, and she thought, man, I could break these up and I could use these as fertilizer. And somebody said, well, you might actually make a little bit more money if you just take them instead of breaking them up and go sell them. And she tried that, and they changed hands a few times, and eventually these tablets came into the hands of authorities, and they were cuneiform tablets. Now, Tel Amarna had been a city that had been founded by, or at least greatly built up, by Pharaoh Akhenaten, that pharaoh who had said, let's worship one god, Aten, the sun god, changed his name to reflect that. And these tablets, they were cuneiform. They were not hieroglyphs. And they were official documents, letters from the Pharaoh to and from the Pharaoh of Egypt from other countries. So it gives us a wonderful picture into different different diplomatic correspondences of the era around the time of Joshua. In fact, there's one letter from the king of Jerusalem that talks about how the Habiru are coming into the land, and it sounds an awful lot like maybe he's speaking of the Hebrews. Now, Habiru sounds like Hebrew, but it might not be quite the same. But maybe there is a little bit of a relationship between the Hebrew people and these Habiru. Next, we want to talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls, especially for somebody who is a biblical student. These were found in what was then Palestine in 1947. Today, we call that area Israel. And at a place along the shore of the Dead Sea known as Qumran, right by the shore of the Dead Sea, on the northwestern side of the Dead Sea. It's a very lonely part of the land, very desolate part of the land, and these cliffs. Standing here with my back to the Dead Sea, looking up at the cliffs, and it just goes. When you're standing by the shores of the Dead Sea, you're about 1,400 feet below sea level, and those mountains just keep going up over a period of 18 miles, all the way up to about 2,500 feet above sea level. So it's quite a rise, not just what you see here, but what you see beyond, if you could go past this original two ridges that we see. And back then there were some shepherds, some Bedouin shepherds that were looking, and one of them was looking for a lost, I think it was a lost goat, if I remember correctly. And there's a number of caves that dot the hillside here, and he thought, well, I'll instead of climbing up into each one of these caves, he was looking for this goat, and he decided to take a rock and throw it up into one of the caves, and he expected to hear this bah, and maybe find the goat, and instead he heard this crash. And he said, that didn't sound like a goat, it sounded like something else. And he went up there either that day or the next day and found some pots. And in this pottery that he found, there was one of them was now broken. There were some scrolls, some 7 scrolls that were found within this cave, and they were in quite good shape considering how old they were. Now, he didn't know how old they were. He thought, well, geez, these might be valuable. One of these is going to end up being the Isaiah scroll. If you want to see the Isaiah scroll, they built the Scroll Museum in Jerusalem, and if you ever go to Jerusalem, you've got to go see the Scroll Museum. It's well worth a visit, where they put it in very low light to protect it, because this is over 2,000 years old, a scroll of the book of Isaiah. There were other scrolls there. Here's the scroll of righteousness. Now, some of the scrolls they found were copies of portions of the Bible. Other scrolls that they found were copies of other Jewish writings, not Bible, that were from the group that lived there by the shores of the Dead Sea. Some of their writings that we found as well. The scroll of righteousness is one of those types of scrolls. Well, our friends who found these scrolls at Qumran, they took their copy to a shoe salesman. He was also when I say a shoemaker, he was also a antiquities dealer. I understand that a lot of people had 2 jobs. They did whatever they did, and they were also sellers of antiquity. Named Kondo, and Kondo. He, took them for, I'm not sure what kind of price, I'm sure money changed hands or consignment or somehow, and he offered to try to sell them. From Kondo, the scrolls now went, and several of them went to Eliezer Sukenik. He was an archaeologist, and he ended up with 3 of the scrolls. And then 4 other scrolls were sold to Mar Samuel, who was with the Greek Orthodox Church that was there in Palestine at the time, and he ended up with 4 of those scrolls. It was around the time, in fact, Eliezer Sukenik talks about how the day he was looking at the scrolls, and noticed that some time had taken place, it was now 1948, and that was the day that the United Nations was recognizing Israel as a new and sovereign country. Well, Mar Samuel, he was with the American Schools of Oriental Research, ASOR. He was a student as well. So we've got the scrolls now in the hands of students and professors of archaeology, and so they're going to be safely taken care of at this point. Sukenik took his 3 scrolls, and one was an incomplete manuscript of Isaiah. It reflected the old Hebrew text as opposed to reflecting the Septuagint. The second was a Thanksgiving book of Thanksgiving hymns, not part of the Bible, part of this group that we think are referred to by Josephus as the Essenes, and a war scroll also by that other people group. So 1 biblical scroll, 2 non-biblical scrolls, but still Jewish and still religious in nature. Meanwhile, Mar Samuel, who was the metropolitan of the Orthodox Church in Jerusalem, he had 4 other scrolls. The Isaiah scroll reflecting some editorial changes, and that's the scholar's opinion on these. So we actually have 2 books of Isaiah, one without those editorial changes, one where they had sort of updated the text a bit. The second was a community rule, again from that group that had copied the scrolls. A pesher, that is we would call it a commentary of Habakkuk, and it reflects Habakkuk, but it also reflects some ideas concerning that book. And finally, a Genesis Apocryphon, that is a writing that's based on the book of Genesis, but it's not the book of Genesis. It's writing some other things from that story. Now, Mar Samuel took his 4 scrolls, and he moved to the United States. While he was there, he put the scrolls up for sale in a newspaper advertisement. We actually have the newspaper advertisement, the Wall Street Journal. This is the 4 Dead Sea Scrolls and biblical manuscripts dating back to at least 200 BC. They were thought to be, and still are, thought to be at least that, perhaps that old. They were for sale, and I'm not sure how long the ad ran. But the scrolls were eventually purchased by Yigal Yadin. He's the son of Eliezer Sukenik, the archaeologist, and he was a general in the Israeli army. In fact, he's better known for being a general, and he purchased the scrolls through an intermediary. He purchased these 4 scrolls for the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and now all 7 of these original Dead Sea Scrolls now came back home to Jerusalem. Eventually, other scrolls were found as well. For example, here we're looking at Cave 4, where a number of scrolls and pieces of scrolls were found, and even in recent times, more studies have been done, more searches have been made, and things continue to be found in and around the caves of the Dead Sea.